kinds of ways. I myself, my first Bitcoin wallet, I forgot the password. I had it on my computer, and I simply forgot the password. And I think there was 0.3 Bitcoins. I had another incident. I mentioned these physical Bitcoins. It's, this is not a physical Bitcoin, it's just a normal coin, but just like this. And I had it in a capsule in my coat pocket, and I considered it my lucky coin. And it had 1 Bitcoin loaded onto it. It was a paper wallet of 1 Bitcoin. And I left it on a park bench in Toronto. So whoever found it, I don't think that they knew what it was. I think that Bitcoin is lost.
Ouch. Welcome everyone to another episode of Tech Talks. Assalamu alaikum. So today we have with us Elias Ahonen, who is a distinguished blockchain author, legal expert, and doctoral researcher. As a director at Roku Europe and a Cointelegraph journalist, he has significantly contributed to the blockchain space since 2013, authoring Blockland, a book that I'm currently reading and tremendously enjoying, and the Encyclopedia of Physical Bitcoins and Cryptocurrencies. That's something we need to talk about. Elias also leads Token Valley, a boutique blockchain consultancy, and is an active member of the global blockchain community. So I want to also say that we met Elias during Outer Edge, which was an event, Web3 event that took place here in Riyadh. We had a very nice time. I sat next to him during a dinner. We had a very long conversation about the endless summers and the winters in Finland when the sun never goes up. In the winter, the sun never comes up, and in the summer, the sun never goes down.
Right.
So that terrified me a little bit. Otherwise, Elias, that was the official biography. Now tell us the unofficial story.
So, thank you again for having me here. So I guess that's the official biography, as you said. Sounds like you make it sound like there's some big secrets behind the surface. I'm trying to think what those might be, but of course I've been in the blockchain space.
Don't forget I read the book.
You know.
So don't forget I read the book, so that there's a lot of secrets there, but not secrets, but there's a lot of story there. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I got into the blockchain space a little over 10 years ago now. It was early 2013, if I recall. And I heard about Bitcoin. I saw it on the dark web, actually. And it was, at that time, $5 or $3 per Bitcoin. And I thought it was very interesting. I was 18 years old at the time. I was studying political science at university in my first year. And I felt that this was a really interesting concept because, here is this digital currency that's on the internet that isn't necessarily controlled or put out by a specific government. And that was really where my interest came from this somewhat academic angle. I bought my first ones for about $20 each. But because I was not, and in some ways still am not, a highly technical person, coder that is, I was 18 at the time I found out about Bitcoin. I had this interest from a somewhat academic perspective of, this is interesting because it's a non-governmental currency that is, new thing, where before, of course, everything is dollars and euros and RMB and whatever like that. And I was not a highly technical person. So I was afraid that, well, if I buy these Bitcoins, I'm gonna lose my private keys. I'm gonna lose my passwords. I don't trust myself to hold these digital assets on my computer. And at that time, back in 2013, when I went on the Bitcoin Talk forums, that was where all the action was happening at that time. That was where Satoshi spoke to all the early Bitcoiners back in, I guess, 2 years earlier or a year earlier. All the conversation, to me, it looked very intimidating. It felt like I was reading a computer science textbook, having never opened a computer science textbook. So what I found were these things called physical Bitcoins. And a couple individuals, one especially named Mike Caldwell, known as Cases in the US, was making these physical coins, brass coins that would say 1 Bitcoin on it. And on the other side, there was a hologram and a sticker. And if you peeled the sticker, there was the private key to 1 Bitcoin or 5 Bitcoins or even more on these coins. So I felt that by buying these physical Bitcoins, which effectively functioned as paper wallets, I could hold my Bitcoin without having to worry about about losing my passwords or private keys. And that's what I did. And that's how I started collecting physical Bitcoins, about which I later wrote my first book, The Encyclopedia of Physical Bitcoins.
Amazing. It's interesting because we're going to take this conversation in multiple ways, but since we're on the topic of Bitcoin, and you were really, really right at the start. I mean, we're talking about almost right at the beginning when Bitcoin was barely born. Now, over time, how has that community changed? Or rather, what has come to replace that early community? And what's different about this community today?
So back in that time, there were barely any other cryptocurrencies. I think Litecoin was around then, and then there were a few other experiments. If you went on coinmarketcap.com, there were, I don't know, maybe 15 tokens there. It was a very different world, and that means, of course, it was very Bitcoin centric. And even the other crypto coins, digital coins, they were actually running off of the Bitcoin Talk forum as far as their communities went. So there was, you could say it was one community that was growing together, and often these other tokens, even Litecoin, was often seen as something of a test net or just a different branch of Bitcoin. And I think as time went on, of course, we had the first ICOs come about, and we had the first altcoins, and we had the altcoin market, as it was then called, and in some circles still is, started acting differently from the Bitcoin market. And when Ethereum came around, that I think really changed the community because it gave a somewhat of a different message and a different community, and it you could say that the cryptocurrency tree branched off. And since then, there's of course been many other branches. Now we can say that there are dozens of very active, high energy communities around different blockchains, which aren't necessarily communicating with each other very much.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to double down on this early time when Bitcoin was, just around the corner, just trying to exist, and you could buy literally like, a pizza with two pizza with a Bitcoin at the time. I recall that when I was in Dubai, we had like people coming from New York, and they were talking about blockchain and Bitcoin back in 2013, 14, things like that. And we had a startup weekend at the time, and we were launching a few traditional startup, and those guys, they were talking about Bitcoin. And they were trying to give Bitcoin to the audience through their mobile, trying to say, hey, I can give you a Bitcoin. And there was this guy also, don't recall the name, but, Nick, something like that, one of the early Bitcoin guy based out of New York.
Spanos.
Anyway, long story short, so, yeah, Spanos, yeah. What is interesting, and I met Mick Spanos in 2019, again in Riyadh, and he was telling me the joke that he gave away some of those Bitcoins to people, and some, most of them, they were like, taking it. In my part of the belief, I was like, I didn't want to give my phone to collect something that could come and maybe hack my phone or whatever. So I just even refused to get any Bitcoin or whatever given to me, because I was not a believer. So in that period of time, there were a lot of people, I would say, collecting or getting it and not really paying attention to it. Can you share maybe a story that yourself could have lost some of those Bitcoin early in the game, or a few of your friends in that period of time, or which happened to us a lot? So the funny joke is, some of those guys, they had the first Apple phone, and the coin was stored in this phone, and the phone is unfindable now somewhere in the house, and they cannot retrieve the Bitcoin even.
Yeah, it's very common. These bitcoins have a name, actually. They're called zombie bitcoins, and zombie bitcoins are when a bitcoin has not moved from its address for I think 10 years or 5 years, depending on how you classify them. And sometimes when these assumed zombies, wake up again, it's a big news item, because if 10,000 bitcoins from 2011 that haven't moved suddenly move, then that's a lot of money that someone suddenly has. Of course, so many exchanges, wallets have failed. People have lost private keys.
We'll be right back after the break.
Taka Talks brings you stories from around the world that will help you understand how crypto and Islamic finance can change our lives for the better. Subscribe and follow to keep learning.
In all kinds of ways. I myself, my first Bitcoin wallet, I forgot the password. I have it. I had it on my computer, and I simply forgot the password. And I think there was 0.3 bitcoins left in there, which is a good amount of money now. Back then, it was a few dollars, and I kept the hard drive just in case. One day I'll remember. I had another incident. I mentioned these physical bitcoins. It's this is not a physical bitcoin; it's just a normal coin, but just like this. And I had it in a capsule in my coat pocket, and I considered it my lucky coin. And it had 1 bitcoin loaded onto it. It was a paper wallet of 1 bitcoin, and I left it on a park bench in Toronto. So I don't. Whoever found it, I don't think that they knew what it was. I think that bitcoin is lost.
Ouch. Yeah. So, Elias, a lot of us come to crypto because of Bitcoin, right? So first of all, the markets are focused on Bitcoin. That's all that anyone ever talks about. So, like, the first thing that somebody would do if they're new to crypto is to find out what Bitcoin is. And then we read the ethos of Bitcoin, and we're like, it's all about decentralization, power to the people. It's a currency nobody controls. It's peer-to-peer, etc., etc. And so we come with this, really nice idea that, oh wow, this is such a aspirational thing, And then we arrive, and today, within the Bitcoin community, the early sort of Bitcoin maxis are now starting to grumble and sort of, to some extent, turning against Bitcoin. So then there are people who say, look, there's too much centralization, the miners are too powerful, or there are too few miners because it's too expensive to mine this stuff. Then there are these people who talk about, well, the early Satoshi wallets we assume belong to Satoshi hold like a bunch of Bitcoin, and if he ever sold it, he would like tank the market and things like that. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think any movement, in order to be successful, has to start off and have a strong ideological element, at least at that early stage, in order to get people passionate, in order to get people to take risks, to follow something, to promote something that isn't obvious necessarily. You have to be. I would argue that I think anyone agrees that to be into Bitcoin really deep back in 2011, 2012, you had to be a little bit crazy. And as time went on, you have to be a little bit less crazy. So me joining in 2013, not as crazy as someone in 2010, versus someone joining in 2018, maybe a little less crazy still. And I think today you have the big investment funds in the U.S., even some banks buying, even less crazy. So I would say that as it gets more popular, more acceptable, at the same time, or perhaps that's part of the reason why, is that the ideology tends to get less intense. And so a lot of people that buy Bitcoin now don't necessarily buy it, in my opinion, from an ideological perspective, but from a simple perspective that this is something that has importance and has value, and that value and importance relative to other things might increase by some probability in the coming years. I think you could ask the same thing. What is the ideology of gold, or what is the ideology of I don't know, Google? there is probably, well, I don't think gold has an ideology, but Google maybe does. But just to buy Google stock, I don't think you need to, breathe that ideology. You simply need to believe that it is something worth owning.
So do you think that these guys are right? Do you think that Bitcoin has lost its way? Or is it simply because other people are adopting it and the ideology is now watered down, they're disappointed that it isn't only the hardcore people in it?
I would go with the latter, because I don't think Bitcoin is conscious in that sense. So I don't think you can say it's lost its way, because Bitcoin hasn't, significantly changed. We can talk about some small things like big blocks, small blocks, or such, but fundamentally it's the same concept of a limited digital asset that operates as it was originally designed to. So it's more of a matter of what kind of people are using it and holding it and so on. And I don't think that itself impacts it that much. So yes, there is a core of people that have the, certain ideological view of it that came from the early days. And of course, that itself is older than Bitcoin itself. It came from an ideological movement of the cypherpunks, from which it arose. And then as it grew, the cypherpunk movement being a very small movement, other people from other movements joined. Some of the first ones were people that were collecting or investing in gold and silver in the US, and they saw Bitcoin as something different, and they took the digital gold view, which was actually not so much a cypherpunk idea. It was a later idea that came about. And then you had the technologists, and then you had other waves. And as the waves get bigger and more mainstream, I think by that fact, you can't have such a intensity about it.
I see. So it's a bit of the Bitcoin maximalists being annoyed that they're not the only ones who are buying this stuff anymore. All right.
Yeah, once again, I wanted to dive a little bit just still on the Bitcoin, because I'm getting this question all the time. Michael Saylor, and is really bullish on the Bitcoin, and of course is very well exposed as well. And then there's people like, kind of having like an argument with him, is like, criticizing a lot other altcoins, in particular Ethereum. And then, of course, we see a movement where there might be a Bitcoin equivalent of ERC20 as well. So people are like, if the guy shoot at the other altcoin openly, that could be also something that could, because he's pushing to the equivalent of the ERC20 on the blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain, which become the similar things at the end of the day. So where is your point, your position on that, and how do you see?
Actually, before we get into that, can you actually explain what is happening? What are these BRC20s, these quote unquote shitcoins on Bitcoin, and what are these layer twos that are popping up? How do they work? And then we can get into that discussion.
So that's
Okay.
That's not necessarily the easiest question, because they of course all work in different ways, but I can give a very simple overview. I guess for background, of course, Ethereum came about in the many years ago, and what it made possible was that instead of just being one coin, it was an ecosystem under which you could build other tokens that included cryptocurrencies, so to say, fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens, so NFTs and tokens effectively, that were operating on the Ethereum blockchain. And that, of course, was very popular. And that was then copied or improved upon, innovated upon, depending on how you look at it. But many other chains. We have Solana as well, which is, and then, numerous others. And that, of course, reverberated back to the Bitcoin community, where there was a thought, well, maybe we can do something like this in Bitcoin, because that's obviously what a large portion of the crypto user community base is wanting. One of the first things that came about was something called ordinals, which allowed people to effectively mint to take individual Satoshis, these are the smallest denominations of a Bitcoin, and assign a certain code to that specific one. So whereas Bitcoin itself is fungible, just like a bag of rice, each piece of rice is a Satoshi, each one is the same. You could take one of them and paint it a certain color, and then you would say that, okay, this one is a specific piece of Bitcoin, and it means a certain thing. And this is a very old idea. Back before even, I think, Ethereum came about, there was a conversation in the Bitcoin space. They were called colored coins, and it was this idea that you could effectively color one Satoshi and give it a special purpose. Maybe you could say that, this is this is a title of my car, and whoever owns this specific piece of a Bitcoin is actually the owner of the car, and that actually kind of makes sense. And fundamentally, that's the concept on which these all these different protocols and BRC tokens and so to say are built on. So now what we have is a system where you can effectively have what we can call NFTs operating on Bitcoin, and also tokens. And that just means whether it's an individual token of which there is one, or whether it's a token of which there is, let's say, 1 million. So it's functionally the same thing. And that means that then it enables a marketplace where you can, in a decentralized fashion, exchange Bitcoins for these other Bitcoin-based tokens, whether they're individual tokens or currencies, so to say, cryptocurrencies. And that creates a certain efficiency.
So then what about the layer twos? Because what I understand is there's kind of a high level of centralization with the layer twos, unlike how it works on Ethereum. And so I'm trying to figure out, why do they call it layer twos, and then actually how do these things actually work?
Which ones are you referring to exactly?
So they have some that are sort of okay. So let me preface it this way. I think the layer twos have abounded because people wanted to figure out a way to make Bitcoin programmable beyond what it is today, right? And particularly, they were trying to figure out how to create a system where Bitcoin can generate yield on the Bitcoin network itself. And so a bunch of layer twos came up to solve this problem. And some of them are actually using the programmability of Ethereum, so they're connecting Bitcoin and Ethereum somehow. And then there are other types of layer twos which I kind of lost track of.
So I have to admit that I'm not super up to date on all of the new things, and I can definitely say that a lot of this, even ordinals, which I mentioned, have been very controversial in the, we can say, traditional Bitcoin circles, where they want to say often that, okay, Bitcoin should only be this kind of unmoving digital gold, and we shouldn't build things around it because that creates more things that can break. It creates more things that can lead to big issues that might be a reputational risk, etc. I wouldn't take a very clear stand any which way. I generally believe innovation is good, but I do think that this kind of yield on Bitcoin, it's very hard to get a very high level of confidence on. It's kind of like saying, how do you get yield on gold? Well, if you have gold bars at home, then, congratulations, you have gold. But if you then decide, well, I want to make my gold to make more gold, I mean, there are methods to do it, but there are always complicating factors, and there are ways that you could end up losing it theoretically. And especially when it comes to something like this, I think I would generally exercise caution there. But I'm not educated enough on these specifics to make a very clear opinion on any one of them.
Yeah, good point on that. And that's Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and it should remain like that, basically.
That's a very popular idea around Bitcoiners, yes.
All right. I'm going to pivot this discussion a little bit. So, first of all, I really am enjoying reading Blockland, and I encourage anyone who wants to learn about sort of the history of Bitcoin and the lore around it, and also people who want to learn about Bitcoin in a non-technical way, to read this book. It's fantastic. It has the best, most colorful analogies. I love it. So you go from being somebody who is deeply embedded in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and obviously using the blockland analogy, as different settlements pop up like Ethereum, etc. There's a lot more interesting things and a lot more different communities that you begin to join. And today you're doing research into DAO governance. Now, so for the benefit of our listeners who but I love the way you explain things. So explain to us what a DAO is.
So a DAO fundamentally is a decentralized autonomous organization. And its definition is in those three words. But of course, that's a lot of it is open to interpretation. And what a DAO really is, there's not a whole lot of agreement as it stands. But the idea of a DAO, I think, is more pertinent, and that is that it's a system or organization of stakeholders that organizes itself on a blockchain instead of necessarily a traditional organization such as a corporation or a foundation, which operate in one specific country according to the laws of one specific country, usually by citizens or residents of that one specific country. Because the blockchain environment is a very global environment where people don't necessarily think about where someone lives, what legal jurisdiction they're under, etc. So it's become a natural way of organizing. So just as if a bunch of, let's say, people immigrated from other countries into the US in the Wild West times, and they all met up in one town, they would form an organization in that town. They wouldn't create they wouldn't create a corporation back in Italy or something like that, where they have no knowledge of what they're doing. And fundamentally, I think something similar has happened. The first DAO operated very close to the Ethereum funding team, and it was meant to fund the Ethereum project. And the idea was that people took their Ethereum and they invested it in the DAO effectively, becoming members of the DAO. And then they used those membership shares, which were each Ethereum being one share effectively, to vote on what this DAO should do. And then it was all done through smart contracts. So instead of legal contracts and legal systems and agreements governing how the organization ran, it was run through smart contracts on the blockchain. Now, a lot of other DAOs don't necessarily go that deep because there's many problems with that, just as there were with the DAO, which have ended up being hacked due to a coding error. So a lot of DAOs will call themselves a DAO appropriately, often, sometimes not. And then they'll use an element of the blockchain, sometimes smart contracts, but also retain some level of human oversight. And that often there's a view that human oversight can be reduced over time, ideally. And as the system grows and matures, the DAO can become increasingly independent and democratic according to their shareholders.
Fantastic. Can you kind of just, to help us understand this concept more deeply, can you walk us through some very interesting use cases of DAOs that exist today that have been used in a way that really highlights the potential of DAOs?
Well, a common one has been charity work, where let's say if 100 people get together, and these are real examples, but I'll just kind of explain it simply. But if 100 people get together, let's say, and they all put in 1 Ethereum, so that's 100 Ethereum, that's $300,000. And then they might all vote on the blockchain of what are they going to do with this pot of Ethereum. And what they might then do is they might invest a portion of that Ethereum into some sort of yield app that starts to generate yield. Or they might be investing it in some other tokens and NFTs, something like that. And they might end up in a situation, ideally, where they collectively own this Ethereum that is generating income every month at a certain amount. Let's say they're generating $3,000 worth of Ethereum per month, or let's say just one Ethereum per month for simplicity's sake. And then every month they have a vote of which charity are we going to donate this one Ethereum to. And ideally, you can create this foundation, this charitable organization that's potentially even not registered anywhere. I say, I mean, there's certain concerns with that, but I'm just saying that this is how it might even work. It might be good to register it somewhere for various reasons, but you can have this self-perpetuating organization based on voting that operates by smart contract that doesn't really rely on any individual humans for it to keep doing what it was funded to do. Where just like in a traditional organization, you have some sort of constitution or organizational articles of incorporation, these smart contracts can function as a similar role, where instead of human oversight checking that are we following our founding documents, the smart contract simply ensures that it happens.
Fantastic. So what we're doing, so you know what we do at TechADAO, and we're building technology that DAOs can use, right? So we imagine that there'll be a group of people who want to protect one another. It's a DAO. They come together and they're like, we want to start a mutual protection fund, so to speak, right? And so we provide the technology for this DAO to do underwriting, to do claims management, so that they can actually function and operate purely using the smart contracts to manage the funds in a way that if somebody passes away in this DAO, that their family will get a payout. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and you would have to figure. I mean, of course, there's the matter of the passing away of an individual is something that doesn't happen on chain, so to say. It happens in real life biologically, and usually when that happens, that results in an official level of paperwork from a government wherever that person was resident. Death certificates, we'll say, and then there needs to then somehow sync up with the blockchain, so to say. Now, in theory, in the future, and this is a very perhaps optimistic view, is that maybe that could automatically be updated to some sort of blockchain by a government in the future. But of course, there being 200 governments and none of them having instituted anything like this yet, I wouldn't hold my breath. But theoretically, that could work, where automatically when the government issues a death certificate, it goes into a blockchain, and then the payout happens. But in practice, what's going to have to happen is that that paperwork will have to be authenticated by someone working for the DAO, maybe 2 or 3 people blind authenticating it, so that there can be no, or that you can reduce the corruption or fraud or mistakes, and then that can be confirmed in there, and then it can be put into the blockchain that this person died, and then the blockchain smart contract would be executed. I think that that's fairly close to what you're doing.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely right. So I think the upshot is there is a future where everything can be automated, but we're not there yet. And we're still in that place where, okay, there's lots of good stuff that can be done, but we're still a couple of steps away from it being truly fully automated and without human oversight. As you said, the goal is to reduce this over time. All right, so now we have a base understanding of what a DAO is. Now, when I think about governance, which is what you are doing your research on, I'm really thinking about it in 2 ways. I'm thinking of internal DAO governance, i.e., how does the DAO organize itself, and then external DAO governance, which is what you also referred to, like how do you go about ensuring regulatory compliance in the quote-unquote real world? Can you tell us a little bit more about your research, and can you shed some insights into those 2 things?
Sure. So as you mentioned, there's 2 sides to the coin. There's how does the organization run internally? That is, how do you design a constitution? How do you design the smart contract themselves? That latter part is not something that I myself do, but it's more a matter of what they can be designed to do and what the rules around the operation should be. very often what we see today, what I believe is a good way of going about a DAO, is to have a council of real people in the DAOs that hold some amount of executive power, and then those individuals can be voted in according to the DAO holders. Now, of course, it goes a bit of a circle, and someone can say, well, that just sounds like a normal corporation or a government where the shareholders vote for directors who then direct how to make the smart contracts and how to run the DAO. But of course, that is how that's the best case for companies that has been operated for a couple hundred years now. So there might be some merit to that as well. I
Something to
myself
learn there. Yeah.
I currently serve that kind of role on the Horizon Foundation, which operates or is closely connected to the Zen Horizon cryptocurrency and blockchain. I'm on something called the Special Council, and the job of that council is simply to look at community proposals, because communities submit proposals to the DAO to be voted on. That is, that someone says that, oh, I think we should do this in the DAO, we should change this and this part of the code, or this and this function. And instead of putting them directly to the community to vote, what we do is the special counsel's role is to effectively review that according to the constitution of the DAO to make sure that it is legal in the DAO. Not necessarily, I mean, of course, also legal in the real world, quote unquote, but so that proposal is not in conflict with the main ideas and funding principles of the DAO. And that's a very small thing, and it's a lot of work in a way if you think about it. But in my opinion, that's something that contributes to creating a strong organization. So that's a couple notes about just the internal governance structures. Then there's the external of where is the DAO based, what is its relationship with the real world, so to say. Where is it tethered, if anywhere, or anchored? And this touches on closely to my current research, which is around maritime law, international maritime law, and the idea of could we actually call a DAO something similar to, is it kind of like a boat out in the ocean? If a boat is out in the ocean, usually it has a flag of a particular country. Sometimes a boat will have no flag, but if it has no flag, then often it has less legal protections. Now, of course, if a boat leaves a certain country and takes down the flag, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's no longer a part of that country. But where it gets interesting is what happens if a bunch of random people get together in the middle of an ocean and build a boat there. Then the boat doesn't come from any country, and that's what a DAO is sometimes resembling. And in practice, now to take this to the practical side, often DAOs will look to have something called a legal wrapper. And the legal wrapper means simply that even though in theory it's operating as a decentralized organization, it's kind of wrapped in this thing that governments can then see it from their perspective. And the way governments and the legal system see things is through being as legal persons. So they'll look at something that happens. If the DAO owes someone money or the DAO sues someone, they're going to ask, well, is it a person, or is it a corporation, or is it a foundation? What is it? And if it's nothing, then the risk is that they'll see it as a person, which can be a problem, because if the DAO does something potentially illegal and you work for the DAO, a government might see that, oh, there is no DAO, it's just you did the thing, and then now you have to pay, which is not something that anyone who works for a DAO wants. So sometimes charity might be the right way of going about with things. And it's, again, very normal things. Like, let's say a credit card. Let's say if the DAO wants to have a credit card to pay for certain bills, it has to have that legal personality of some sort. And now there's a whole other world of possibilities there. What country would you incorporate it in? what are the incorporation laws like, and what kind of organization, and that's a whole other topic.
So this is, I mean, this is genius. Are you suggesting? Yes, are you suggesting, because you use the analogy of DAOs being like ships essentially, and they're moving all over the place and they don't really reside in one place. And you talk about maritime law, and I'm thinking to myself, are you suggesting that we can apply maritime law to DAOs? Because that is a incredibly interesting way of looking at things, and I think there might be something there.
It's an argument that I'm currently working on as part of my PhD, but I won't go that far to say that it's something we can apply today. And even if we attempted to apply today, I can't go as far to say that it would necessarily work. But there is a certain legal logic, in my opinion, that at least a similarity, and we can explain DAOs in a similar way, because fundamentally, the reason we have maritime law is that because the ocean is not within a certain country's jurisdiction. It's, I mean, historically, just the way law was formed is that you have a king or something like that holds power over land. And if you run away, then you end up in some other king's land. But if you take a boat and sail far enough, you're kind of out of the reach of anyone. And over time, we developed that into air law. So if you're in an airplane high enough of a country, the different laws apply to you than if you were on the ground itself. Also, the space law is if you fly a satellite over a country or far away from Earth, the laws are simply different. And fundamentally, it's because if you are, let's say, a ship of the United Kingdom in the 1600s, and something illegal happens, something happens on that ship, there's a mutiny or something like this, the king cannot send the Marines to arrest the crew immediately, because they can't know what's happening on the ship, and simply they can't reach them because they're out at sea. And fundamentally, that's similar to the blockchain environment, because if something happens on a smart contract that a government says shouldn't happen, they can say this, we don't like this, but they can't really change it, because you can't change a smart contract. You can't edit the blockchain, so to say, in the way that you can edit things on land that you control. Even you can go to an office of a company and tell them to take down a website, things like this. But a blockchain doesn't work like that. So I think it operates more closely to an ocean.
Wow, this is very, very interesting, and I really do hope. When are you gonna finish your PhD? Because I want to read this paper.
Well, it's a work in progress. We'll see how long it takes, but bit by bit, I'll start to publish some of these ideas. It's been work. I'm currently putting some finishing touches on the first piece.
I think this thing really has legs. So we've been speaking a lot with different lawyers about how to what kind of like you said, legal wrapper exists for foundations, for DAOs, etc. So this is coming up just at the right time. I'm still stuck on this idea, but okay. So I guess we're ready to wrap this up now. What would you recommend to me? Because as I said, we are looking at different ways of incorporating the DAO now. What would you recommend to DAOs in general in terms of a legal framework? What makes sense today under the current legal constraint?
From a global perspective, I would suggest that if you want to operate something that resembles a company, consider operating it as a company somewhere, where you can start a company and then simply have the company be effectively owned by the DAO, but legally speaking, the company owns the DAO. The other option I would suggest is create a foundation, which there could be a certain logic there as well, because if you're looking at a mutual benefit organization, whether it's a foundation or charity or something along these lines, organization. It depends very much on the jurisdiction itself and the exact way that the work is done in the organization and currently and in the visible or predicted future. But that would be my advice, and I apologize, it's very vague.
No, it's fine. And I guess the companion question to that is, what would you recommend to regulators who are trying to understand this space? How should they go about approaching DAOs?
I would. That's actually no one's asked that question before. That's a new one. I would say keep an open mind and understand that this DAO phenomena, where it comes from. I think if you can understand the history of the blockchain space, and of course here I can chill Blockland again. That's fundamentally why I wrote it, because I think to understand where the space comes from, where this blockchain movement comes from and how it developed, I think to understand that is very important in order to then start to regulate them. But of course, when we talk about regulation, most regulation doesn't come out of the blue where someone says, okay, we're going to regulate DAOs, because no one really can agree on what a DAO even is. In practice, governments are regulating money laundering. They're regulating corporate tax. They're regulating things like this, boring things. And then they'll look at a DAO and then they'll identify, well, this looks like this because this is what I am programmed to see. So that's, I think what I would say.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. So, last words for you. Where can people reach out to you? Well, first of all, how can people get a copy of Blockland? Because highly recommend it. Where can people reach out to you if they want to connect with you and ask you questions and potentially collaborate even on your research?
Well, Blockland you can find on Amazon, as you can find my other book, which is the Encyclopedia of Physical Bitcoins. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and just leave a message request with a message of some kind. I'll be happy to get back to you. And I think, my email is listed, I think, on LinkedIn, on Twitter or something like that as well. So I'm not a hard person to find.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Elias. This has been very eye-opening, and I always learn something when I speak to you.
Thank you so much, Elias, and looking forward to hear more from your research. And of course, it would be great to have you next in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, because we believe there's a lot of innovation coming up from the region. And of course, we'll update you as well about some of the new things that are happening in a very fast paced here, and welcome you again if you around the corner.